On this episode, we're talking about Moria!
Moria. You fear to go into those mines. The dwarves delved too greedily and too deep. You know what they awoke in the darkness of Khazad-dum. Shadow and flame.
Okay, that was a cool scene and all, but that did not happen in the book. Gandalf did not know there was a Balrog in Moria. In fact, no one knew that. If he knew there was a Balrog in there, he probably wouldn't have led them straight to the Balrog. So there's a lot of differences between the films and the book, and these changes often make people ask a lot of questions. Usually because the films don't make any sense. But we here at LOREMASTERS have noticed a common question about Moria, and that question is, why doesn't anyone know what's going on in Moria? Isn't Gimli a dwarf? Don't dwarfs live there? Shouldn't he be up to date with the going-ons of Moria? He acts like his family is there having a good old time, and then they show up and everyone's been dead for forever. How long have those corpses been lying there? Shouldn't Gandalf know what's going on in the world? Okay, that's enough. This particular question arises from the movie's lack of time. They can't dole out all this information like the book can, so they had to change everything and, you know. But we here at LOREMASTERS have all the time in the world! To answer this question, let's start at the beginning of the First Age. Now we're gonna keep things real simple for the sake of brevity and to keep the focus on Moria, alright? We're skipping over like 3 whole books with this 1 page of script, so if this creates more questions than answers for you, then I don't know. Go read the Celebrimbor. Many thousands of years ago, during the First Age, the elves awoke in the world, which is called Arda, by the way, and the dwarves followed soon after, and some of these dwarves made their home in Khazad-dum. It wasn't called Moria at that point. But during the First Age, Khazad-dum was way over in the east and didn't really come into the stories of that time, which mostly took place in the west. Now the First Age ended with the War of Wrath, in which the Valar banished Morgoth from the world, and in the process they really messed all the land up, and what was left is what we know as Middle-earth. And so the Second Age began. Khazad-dum comes into more of the tales and events of that time because, you know, it's right there. But we're not really talking about that stuff. Let's move on. After thousands of years and lots of things happening, the Second Age came to an end with the Battle of the Last Alliance, in which Sauron was destroyed, for the time being. And still Khazad-dum, okay, I'm tired of saying Khazad-dum, I'm just gonna say Moria from now on. And still Moria was the chief city of the dwarves and actually played an integral part in thwarting Sauron's plans of conquering Middle-earth, but we're not talking about that. Anyways, bam! Sauron was defeated and the Third Age began. And for almost 2,000 years, Moria remained the capital city of Durin's folk until disaster struck. In the year 1980 of the Third Age, Durin was killed, and in the following year the dwarves fled from their ancient home. No one knew for certain what happened, but rumor of Durin's bane spread far and wide, and it was after this event that the elves called it Moria, the Black Chasm. Okay, let's jump ahead again. A lot of other things happened in the Third Age. Invention of pipe weed, the White Council. Okay, here we are in the year 2941 of the Third Age, or 1341 by Shire reckoning. This is when the events of The Hobbit took place. And like I said, we're keeping it brief, but hopefully this gives you a sense of the timeline of Middle-earth. Anyways, we stopped at The Hobbit for a reason. For it was 30 years after the events in The Hobbit that Balin set out from Erebor with a host of dwarves to reclaim Moria, and 30 years after that, the events of the Lord of the Rings took place. So finally, we arrive at the answer to the question from several pages ago. Moria has been vacant for nearly 1,000 years when the Council of Elrond takes place, and it's here that we learn from Gloin, Gimli's father, about Balin's attempt to reclaim the long-lost home of the dwarves, and that they haven't heard any word from Balin for many years. So that's why no one is really sure what's going on in Moria. Balin and company could be in there, they could all be dead, no one really knows. So that answers that question. But there's a few other questions that we see about Moria from time to time, and there's a lot more differences between the book and the film, so since we're here, we might as well... Okay, elf runes on a dwarf door. Despite what Peter Jackson would have you believe, not all elves and dwarves hate each other, and again, this is a situation where the movie can't stop and focus too much on lore. Also, I think people have enough trouble with all the names as it is. Gandalf reads some of the runes on the door of Durin in the film, but in the book he reads the whole thing. The doors of Durin, Lord of Moria. Speak, friend, and enter. I, Narvi, made them. Celebrimbor of Holland drew these signs. Now you may have heard of Celebrimbor, the elven smith. He's kind of famous for, making the elvish runes of power? And apparently he was friends with Narvi and helped him with his door. We don't know much about Narvi. He was a dwarf, I guess. I don't know. Alright, what else happened in Moria? In the book, Frodo and Gandalf actually had this conversation back at Bag End, which is kind of funny to think about. Frodo hadn't even left the Shire. Hadn't even left Hobbiton, and he was already like, I wish the ring had never come to me. This part is simply inexcusable. They're going down and to the left. They're supposed to go up and to the right. How could Peter Jackson get that wrong? It's interesting to note that this might be Ori, who was also part of Thorin's company in The Hobbit. In The Lord of the Rings, Gimli says that this last entry in the Book of Mazarbal was in Ori's hand. So that's like a cool little Easter egg, I guess, having his corpse there holding the book and all. Also, there was no cave troll in the book. I mean, Gandalf does say, they have a cave troll, but we never actually see it. This was just a large orc. Okay, this scene has always bothered us here at LOREMASTERS. Obviously, this didn't happen in the book, and a good rule of thumb is that if something doesn't make sense or is, kind of dumb, then odds are it's been fabricated for the films. So first of all, there's more than enough drama and danger in Moria without this scene. They just fought an army of orcs and are now running from a Balrog, and in the next scene, Gandalf confronts the Thane. So why does this scene exist? I mean, it's probably here for pacing or something, which is fine, but it's kind of comical to think that their couple of 100 pounds is going to have any impact on which way this 800 million ton stone is going to fall. But even before that, all of our characters do something really dumb and out of character, which is my actual problem with this scene. They leave Frodo and Aragorn last. The King of Gondor and the Ring Bearer who is bearing the one ring. I mean, I know this is like fake tension and that's why they're last. Like we're all gonna believe that these two are gonna die halfway through the first movie. Sorry guys, but Boromir and Samwise are more important. But what do you know, they all survive. Okay, I'm done ranting. On to the next scene. This is one of the most accurate depictions from the book in the whole movie, and there's not a whole lot to say about it concerning a book versus film discussion. It was cool in the book that Aragorn and Boromir turn around and run back to the bridge to help Gandalf. That was cool. Of course he fell before they got there. This is also a great opportunity to discuss some lore, and we here at LOREMASTERS never pass on an opportunity to discuss more Moria lore. Play the intro! LOREMASTERS. Okay, Gandalf is on the bridge of Khazad-dum facing off against the Balrog, and he says a bunch of words. Now, a lot of people probably think he's like casting a spell or just saying fantasy babble, but if you think this is fantasy babble, then you don't know Tolkien very well. Here's our LOREMASTER's take on what Gandalf is talking about. The first thing he says is, I am a servant of the secret fire. The secret fire is probably a reference to the imperishable flame, which is mentioned at the beginning of the Silmarillion and references Iluvatar, or maybe even Iluvatar's power of creation. Iluvatar is the one who created everything in Tolkien's universe, more or less. He created the world, elves, men, the Maiar, which would include Gandalf and the Balrog. Gandalf's starting off by letting the Balrog know that he's wise in the ways of lore, as only another Maiar could be, and at the same time he's saying Iluvatar is on my side, bro. We basically interpret this whole speech by Gandalf as a form of intimidation, by the way. Next he says, wielder of the Flame of Ainur. Now this is actually up for some debate. Flame of Ainur isn't really mentioned anywhere else in the writings of Tolkien, but if you're up to date on your Elvish, then you'll know that Ainur is the Elvish word for sun. Now the sun is actually a Maiar like Gandalf, who is holding the last fruit of the tree Laurelin. Yep, I'm not making that up. That's what the sun is. Read the Silmarillion! So we interpret this phrase to mean that Gandalf is versed in fire magic, much like Arien. That's Arien, the sun. The one holding the fruit, remember? Is this confusing? Anyways, it's said that Arien was a spirit of fire that Morgoth failed to corrupt, which is exactly what the Balrogs are. Spirits of fire that Morgoth corrupted. So again, Gandalf is just cryptically telling this guy that he's as powerful as he is. Oh, I see you're kind of like made of fire? Well, I like fire too. Pine cones! We thought at first that Gandalf might be referring to the fact that he wields Narya, the Ring of Fire, but we here at LOREMASTERS decided that that was bogus. First of all, the Balrog probably doesn't know what Narya is. I mean, he's been hiding underground since Morgoth was defeated at the end of the First Age. I mean, maybe Sauron told him about it at some point, I don't know. But Gandalf would never reveal that he held a ring of power, especially to the enemy. Alright, what's Gandalf say next? I am a servant of the sacred fire, wielder of the flame of honor. The dark fire will not avail you. Now this is just Middle-earth talk for you're going down. But really, he's probably referring to Morgoth when he says dark fire, since Balrogs were his servants. He's saying Morgoth won't help you. No one can help you now, bro, you're mine. And the last thing he says is Flame of Udun. Once again, Gandalf is revealing to this guy that he's strong in the ways of lore. No one would know to call a Balrog Flame of Udun except another Maiar, or maybe an ancient powerful elf like Glorfindel or Galadriel. Udun is another name for Autumno, which was the first fortress that Morgoth made during the First Age. Go read the Silmarillion. And needless to say, Balrogs probably dwelt there. So Flame of Udun, Flame of Autumno, Servant of Morgoth, it's all one big truth bomb that Gandalf's dropping on this chump. He knows what's up and he's about to give him what for. Oh. He fell. We'd also like to point out that this is the third documented case where someone has destroyed a Balrog, but also died in the process. Gandalf can now be counted amongst the most ultimate of badasses, along with Glorfindel and Ecthelion of the Fountain. Then they leave. So that's Moria, and it's pretty tame as far as changes between the book and the films are concerned. And believe us when we say that these two are entirely, completely different things. We here at LOREMASTERS could write a whole book about how different the movies are from the source material. We could call it, I don't know, The Lord of the Rings. Or we could make more videos. But what would they be about? Well, there's a lot of characters that have been changed in the films. Elrond is made out to be like a villain. That's a crime. Aragorn is pretty different in the books. Some characters are kinda like entirely fabricated, or they do things that are completely out of character. Peter Jackson was never in the books. Ted Sandyman was in the extended editions, and I think that's Farmer Maggot, so I can't really complain about them. What else? Now I'm just rambling because the video should have faded out by now.